Charlie Olson is well known to many of you. I think we know that. He was born in Santa Clara Valley, and he is a third-generation Sunnyvale Orchardist. His mother started the family fruit stand on El Camino Real that came to be known as C.J. Olson's Cherries. Those cherries are just one of the many things he knows about, as we shall see. I also heard he was a football star, so, well. Today he continues to be the orchardist in charge of the Sunnyvale Heritage Orchard, which, like the Saratoga Heritage Orchard, which surrounds us today, and the one in Los Altos, continues to be a landmark for all of us. Robin Chapman is a longtime broadcast journalist, but we won't hold that against her. And she is interviewing Charlie today. She was born and raised in Los Altos. She covered our nation's capital and survived. And since she returned to her home region, she has authored several successful books about California history, including Historic Bay Area Visionaries, California Apricots, The Lost Orchards. So let's give them a great welcome.
Well, most of all, we really want to thank Charles J. Olson for coming today. So let's give him a big hand. Now, in talking with him in the last few weeks, I've tried to pre-interview him for some of the stories that we're going to tell today. And we'll just have to see how it goes because we've never done this before. I have learned a few things about him. He wears a size 14 shoe. He played professional football in Canada. He went to college on athletic scholarships. And he is a very interesting person. So let's just get to the beginning of the story.
Thank you. First, I have to thank the Historical Society here and Robin for all the publicity. And thank you all for coming, because I know you all gave up NFL football today to cover this story.
That's right.
So I might have to break in if I can and tell you some of the scores.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you, Robin. Well, the best thing I can tell you is that we're talking about one family, mine, ours, and my grandfather started it in 1899. He came from Sweden to start with, and he got a ticket on a boat from the King of Sweden, along with a lot of other people from Sweden who they had a famine in 1875. Story has it that the government of Sweden gave anybody who wanted to come to the United States a free one-way ticket by ship. So he took it up and ended up in Minnesota and developed a little bit of influenza. So the doctor said he had to get to a better climate. It was 40 below zero in Minnesota in the winter time. But it was very similar to what they had in Sweden. So he ended up in San Francisco, and there he met my grandmother. And they were married. She was also from Sweden.
Now tell me how tall your grandfather was. How tall?
He was 6'2".
How tall was your
My
grandmother?
grandmother was 6'1".
Okay. They worked out well, and they met at a Swedish church.
Pardon me?
Did they meet at a church?
I'm not sure about that. My aunt, who she's referring to in the church, became a minister.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not sure that they did meet in the church, but they were pretty straight-laced, and they followed the white line, and that was it.
That's your grandparents.
My grandfather got up every morning at 5 o'clock and had an oatmeal and read the Bible. And that's how he lived his life. And so there was no gray area, there was no room for mistakes.
And how did they end up coming to the Santa Clara Valley?
Well, in the early 1900s, a fellow named W.E. Crossman in Sunnyvale put an ad in the San Francisco paper that a free train ride and barbecue if you want to come and see and invest money in land in Sunnyvale. So he took the job because it was pretty foggy in San Francisco and it hurt his influenza. So he came down here and he bought 5 acres. If you know Sunnyvale, right where the Target store is. That was the first property.
And it wasn't called Sunnyvale then, it was
No, it's called
Murphy's.
Instant Station.
Oh, Encinal Station.
That was the name of it. They didn't have a name, and they couldn't keep that name because there was another city in California that was named that. So you couldn't have two cities with the same name in the state. So they came down, and they planted, he wanted to get in the cherry business for some reason. He'd heard a lot of good stories about it, and that's what he did. He planted a cherry orchard right there where the toy store is. And he bought a house, and the first house that he built in Sunnyvale, a guy by the name of Berlinson, a Swede, built him a house for $600.
Do you want to tell the people how much the land cost that they bought?
I think it was around $500 an acre. Land in Sunnyvale was quote never cheap. We have some friends in Patterson, California, who checked the deed of title on their property. It was sold originally in Patterson in the late 1800s for $1 an acre. So $500 an acre was a pretty big price because there was not a lot of money floating around. So while he was waiting for the cherries to grow, to sell them, he went to work as a handyman for the neighbors. And he also raised some milk cows. And they would go around selling milk, but that didn't work out too well.
But now from 5 acres, your family ended up owning 55 or something.
Well, that took a few years.
Yeah, it took a while.
So the city of Sunnyvale incorporated in 1906, and they expanded the boundaries, including his orchard. And he did not want to be in the city. So at the same time, a fellow died, his name was Lyons, and he had 25 acres on El Camino and Sunnyvale Saratoga Road. So my grandfather sold the 5 acres, and he bought 10 acres from the Lyons family, right on El Camino. So they moved there, and they had the 2 children. My father, his name was Royal Charles, and my auntie was Elsie. And so she became, in her career, a minister, ordained minister, and my dad went to work.
And your dad went to work very young.
Yeah, as young as you can get. They had jobs at the age of 5 and 6. And that's what everybody did. It wasn't just him. In fact, the history of the valley, or any farming community, is they have a lot of kids, so they don't have to hire anybody.
But your dad left school at something like 13, right? Your father.
Yeah. They went to a one-room schoolhouse in Sunnyvale called Encinal, and the first and second grades was on the first floor. Then they graduated to the second floor, the third and fourth, and on the other side of the building, the 4th and 5th grades, and then the 4th and 6th, and then you came back down. 7th and 8th were on the bottom floor. So when you graduated from grammar school, most of the kids did not continue, he said, but he and his sister decided they wanted to go to Mountain View High School because there was no high school in Sunnyvale. So they rode a bicycle because they picked Mountain View. It was the closest bicycle ride. So that's how they did it. But then when First World War was breaking out, my dad was 14 in that age, and he quit school to become a full-time farmer and to help the family earn money. And I have one of the early day Bank of Italy bank books, and I'm amazed that the deposits, some were as high as $1. So it was very interesting to see 95 cents, 80 cents.
And that Bank of Italy became, people know it became the Bank of America.
Yeah, later on.
So your father at 15 was an early depositor.
Right.
Yeah, to the Bank of America. Now, I'm gonna skip a little bit because your grandparents were from Sweden. Your father was Swedish, born in the United States. But he worked from 15 until he was in his 20s, and somehow or another, you have a mother from Beirut, Lebanon. So how
That's a whole new story, but that's a very good story.
So how did your mother and your father get together?
Well, my mother and there were 7 kids in her family. There was 4 girls and 3 boys, or vice versa. And Lebanon is only about the size of the Santa Clara Valley. So there wasn't anything for anybody to do, especially when everybody in town was having children. And I think the oldest got the best, and then the gals, when they got married, the husband took care of them. So the 3 brothers, one moved to Venezuela, one went to Greece, and one went to Mexico. And my mother, who was about, this is 1925, she was 21 years old. She followed her favorite brother to Monterrey, Mexico, I believe in 1925, and she spent the next 7 years raising his children. He had 5 children. She became a nanny, but she contracted malaria. They had no quinine in those days, and the doctor told her if she didn't leave Mexico, she would die within a year because her immune system would go to hell, pardon the expression. So anyway, she paid a fellow $100, or the family did, to drive to 1,000 miles from Monterrey, Mexico, to Houston, Texas, then from Houston, Texas to Sunnyvale, California, where her sister lived, who came here earlier. And her sister married her sweetheart in North Dakota, and for some reason, I'm not clear that how they got to Sunnyvale, but they all got here.
And they had a store in Sunnyvale?
And they had a little what you call a mini mart or a speedy mart or a 7-Eleven.
It was before that time. Yeah, it was a little grocery store.
They lived right across the street from the school, and the school needed to expand, so they paid them a real good price for their property across the street from the school. So they all moved down to El Camino and Tate Street, and they built their house with the basement and a store, and then above the basement, the store they lived.
And the store was right across from what?
The fruit stand, but it wasn't there yet. So my mother, to be a young, energetic, 5-foot-tall woman, she needed work. So my aunt told her to go across the street if the fellow needed cherry packers, because they had a cherry orchard there, which is true. So she went to work, and within weeks she told my auntie, her sister, that she was going to marry that fellow till he had nobody to wash his clothes or cook for him. And knowing women, she did it. They got married in 1933,
but there was a problem.
Big problem. My grandfather, who I mentioned was straight and narrow, but not akin to having his son, married a woman of dark hair with black eyes, and the name was Lamar. Her first name was Rose, so he disowned my dad. So anyway, 1930, my grandfather passed away, and my aunt inherited all of the property that half would have been my dad's.
She inherited because your father had disowned him. Is that it?
Yeah.
Written him out of the will.
Grandfather disowned my
Yeah,
grandfather.
grandfather. Yeah.
So then, my aunt, being a Christian and a minister, knew that was not correct. So she gave his share back to my father. So that was the way a good lesson in doing the right thing. So then anyway, my mother, of course, went to work, and she saw a lot of benefits in putting up a fruit stand. So in 1933, she had my dad put her up a little fruit stand with basically 2 sawhorses and a piece of plywood, and she sold cherries off the plywood stand along the El Camino highway until it intersects the El Camino. She did very well. In fact, the next year, my dad built her a shed to keep her out of the sun and the rain. So from that point on, she made enough money in her fruit stand to buy the additional 15 acres of that property. And it took her, the last sale was in 1940. So that's how we got 25 acres on the El Camino.
You know, one of the interesting things about this story is that his father was a really good farmer. And his mother was a really good businesswoman. And I think we saw how she gave your father the business by deciding to marry him, right? And she also grew your business. Wasn't she
Correct,
good at that? Yeah.
And that fruit stand developed, and eventually got to be kind of famous because of the way my dad raised the fruit and the way my mother sold the fruit. And it was pretty famous around, and people came all over to buy the cherries, and I've had the pleasure to talk to many people over the years that remember my mother and come to the stand, and it was a crime for her to lose a sale. So she was a pretty good sales lady.
How many of you remember his parents, his mother? Anybody here remember? Well, yeah, so some of the people do remember. Now you, meanwhile, after the family was born, did you start working in the orchard very young?
Yeah, that was the only job I ever had. We started, and I think it was a folksy story, but that was the truth, probably in a lot of families. As soon as I could, we had a wood shed where we stored the wood. And by the way, that same builder built a new house on the 10 acres that my grandfather bought across the El Camino. And he charged them $800 for that house. Then my grandfather gave him a tip of $25 for building it on time, on the budget, and all that kind of stuff.
But you started very young filling the wood bin at your house, at your farmhouse. You did the chopping of the wood?
Well, I never chopped it, but I did my share, but I had to fill up the wood box, and that's the only heat in the house. So that wood box wasn't full. He did not make the fire. He got the fire product too. And so it was a lot of fun. It was when you don't know any better or any different, it doesn't make much difference because that's all you know. So
now, did your father had a packing house? Had his own packing house?
That was later.
And did he sell through Sunsweet, or did he sell through Del Monte? Who did he sell his fruit through besides the fruit stand?
He realized, as many farmers did, that it's hard to make any money dealing with a cannery because they always, quote unquote, beat you down so much. So he took the middleman out. So he sold his fruit direct to the customers, and he cut out the cannery. And that's how he did it, and he grew not very big in comparison to companies like Mayfair Packing, Valley View Packing, Mariani Packing, Sunsweet Packing. My dad hemmed probably the most, about 800 tons of prunes, whereas the Sunsweet handled half of close to 62,000 tons. So it was but he did what he could, and what he could afford, and he just said in his comments to us that it's better to make a little money all the time than a lot of money at once. So that's what he did. He worked until he was gone doing that.
And he lived into his 80s?
Yeah, this man.
Now, when he was growing, he grew besides cherries. What did he grow? I know he grew
Well, he had
apricots.
3 crops. He had apricots, cherries, and prunes. And the reason he had the 3 crops, if one failed, the other 2 would carry you. And a lot of farmers did that. And that's what it was. But later on, he learned that the cherries were the money maker. And they still are. And so he pulled out everything except the sun apricots, and he planted all the cherries.
This is a little bit of a side story, but I wanted you to tell the people how you ended up playing professional football.
Well, don't fall asleep on this one. I went to Fremont High School at the grade age of 14.
And were you big then, Charlie, when you were 14? Were you big
I was
fella?
5'4", weighed 118 pounds.
That's about the size Deborah is, your daughter, yeah.
That's like my young daughter back there. And so the coach was Fenton Hill, who, by the way, is still alive, God bless him. And he put a pair of shoulder pads on me, and they almost fell off my shoulder to the ground. And he tried not to laugh. But he told me to come back next year when I grew a little bit. So. But next year I didn't grow much. And the next year I was 5'6", 125 pounds. I was going to make it. And then eventually I got to be, as a senior, 6'3", and I weighed 155 pounds. And the fun part about that was my mother was not much on throwing things away, and my pants had got too short. My shoes didn't fit, but she said they still have a lot of wear in them. So I took I wore the clothes to school, then I got the name High Pockets. Because they had people in the flood coming and all that good stuff. So it was a lot of fun. And eventually we had a very good team, and a high school team, and we were contending for the championship. And we had a wonderful quarterback named Bill Moore, and he was sought out by the other college teams. And so I made a deal with them. I said, don't go to any college unless they take me. So that was the deal. So they came to see Bill Moore because he was the quarterback. He was the hurdles champion of the Valley. And I was just another guy standing around. Anyway, the coach came, and Dick Forrest from, he was playing for Hartnell College, that's in Salinas. And so Bill did tell him that he'd go to Salinas if he took me. And so the coach looked at me, scratched his head, and he said, he's tall enough. So anyway, I went to Hartnell College, and we had a wonderful 2 years. We were undefeated, went to the Junior Rose Bowl, and then got a scholarship to the University of Denver.
But at the Junior Rose Bowl, you skipped the part about where you got a date with the princesses from the Pasadena Rose Bowl. Are you going to tell that?
Let's skip all that. Let's skip all that. Anyway,
So your
it was a great experience.
Played in the Junior Rose Bowl.
Yeah, Junior Rose Bowl.
Hartnell did.
45,000 people showed up, and that's a big deal when you're 18 years old and you've never been out of Sunnyvale. And we flew down there, if you believe that. And it was rough weather, but we didn't know any difference if we'd never flown before. So it was a propeller airplane, and we got down anyway. We made it down there. And
So it was about 1951?
52.
52.
1952. That was in the heyday of the Junior Rose Bowl. It lasted about 14 or 15 years, but then they stopped. A lot of great players came out of that.
And did a coach from Denver see you play there? Is that how?
Well, yeah, the coach from Denver was there, and he asked me and a couple other fellows to come back to Denver University, and we didn't even know where Denver was. But he didn't know that. He told us that there was hardly anybody coming out with the team, so we piled all our goods in a 1947 Studebaker car. And we drove to Denver, and we showed up the first day of practice. It was 133 players showed up to play the team.
And were you there on scholarship, or were you trying out for a scholarship?
Well, we were there on some, but we made the team, so we got our scholarship. That was part of the deal.
And were you, Charlie, were you a scholar at the University of Denver? Were you a really good student when you were there?
No. That's simple. It's that simple. Anyway, it was a lot of fun. The teachers, I always say the teachers are some of the greatest people in the world. And I mean that. And they helped us, and they helped me a lot. And they told me, you've got to learn something besides just, sitting there.
And you had to keep a C average, right?
I had to have a C average to play.
Did
So
you?
one of my teachers told me that I wasn't paying attention enough, so she flunked me. And so that brought my grade point down. It never was high, but it brought it lower than that. So anyway, she helped me, and I got a B in the class, and so that brought my grades up, and I got finished the season.
So she made you do a little work, actually. Yeah. So what did your parents with the Orchard think about your football career in Denver?
Well, my dad was very, very happy with it, but my mother had no idea what they were doing out there. And that was really funny, because she says, what are these guys doing here? She was from Lebanon, and I don't think she went past the 5th grade. I may be wrong on that one, but she had a lot of street smarts, but she didn't think football was, she never got interested in it.
But she must have known when you got a contract to play football for, what, $6,000, $10,000 a
She
year?
first questioned me, how much are they going to pay you? And I told her $6,000 a year.
And that was in the Canadian Football League, the Canadian
Yeah,
Football League.
because I had a chance to go with the Chicago Bears, but they only offered me 4,000. So, we got kind of greedy, and took it. It was a very good experience. I did well. I got to be a starter. Not to be bragging or complaining, but I'm very proud of that I made the team. And starting on, and then I got hurt, and that was the end of that. So then I went back in the ranch and went to work. And the amount of money you make at that time it sounded great, but it didn't carry you through the year. You had to have another job, and so, and then you risk an injury and all that kind of stuff. So that was the end of the career right there. But I had a cup of coffee in the road if you want to use it.
You actually ended up in the your college Hall of Fame. Is that right? In Denver's Hall of Fame?
Yeah, me and a bunch of guys. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And you're also in the Sunnyvale Hall of Fame, right? Oh, the Fremont High School Hall of Fame. And you were the #1 future farmer of America.
Right? That was my proudest achievement. I got that award as a senior, and we had future farmers with the curriculum, and so we went to school in the arts, or we call it math and English in the morning, and after lunch we were spending all the time with the future farmers. So it was a feather in my hat, if you want to use that term.
But your teacher or your coach said you were really good at farming.
Yeah, I took to it. I liked it. So like anybody here in the room, if you like what you're doing, you can do it better. And I enjoyed it very much. And it's such a gratifying job, even though it's a lot of hard work, because so many people are so grateful for what you do. And I know that farmers work very hard, and to be successful, that you have to do it. And the reward is, of course, they buy the fruit or the vegetables or whatever they raise. And so to paraphrase somebody that said that every once in a while you need a doctor, a lawyer, or Indian chief, but every day, 3 times a day, you need a farmer.
That's a really good thing to remember. I wanted to ask you how the Sunnyvale Heritage Orchard came about, because you still are the orchardist for those acres in Sunnyvale that surround the museum. But you were growing them before they became the Heritage Orchard.
Well, the city of Sunnyvale built a community center, which at that time there was only 2 others. But they had bought 33 acres to build it on, and when the time came, they got the plans all done. Inflation ate about 30% of the money up. So what they did was they scaled down the entire project to fit the money. And they ended up with 13 acres of unused land with all dead trees. And the mayor of Sunnyvale was a friend of mine. He asked me if we'd do something with it until they decided what to do with it. So we took it over. We made a 2-page lease, if you would. And we bulldozed all the dead trees and leveled it. And we planted about 950 trees. And it was a beautiful thing to watch. It's great soil. It was part of a former 250-acre ranch. It was called the Spalding's Caulking Ranch, and it extended from Wolf Road to Old San Francisco Road to Fremont Road. It was quite a size area. And then in 1939, the highway El Camino was cut through an angle, which chopped it up, but the owners lost the ranch in the Depression, in the Great Depression, and you had to pay cash to buy it. So my dad wanted to buy a big piece of the cherry orchard, and he saved his money, and he bought 15 acres. And that's how we got the 15 acres on Old San Francisco Road.
But then this is the Heritage Orchard. Was it nearby then?
Part of the same thing.
Part of the same plot. And you decided to plant it in Blenheim apricots. Was that
That's
just was
what
a
was there.
good crop there? It was a good time to plant them. They were selling well, obviously. So you planted the whole 13 acres of the Heritage Orchard in apricots.
Correct.
And then you grew it from the 70s until...
Still doing it. In fact, this morning, before I I got here and got all gutted up, we were changing the pipe in the mud, and I was saying to myself, I don't know if I can make it. But anyway, we knew we were irrigating right now, we just fertilized it, and that's 42 years now that turned out to be, we've been taking care of that orchard.
But around the year 2000, some people came to the mayor and said, let's keep this orchard, right? Is that what happened?
Well, that's what we want to do, and it's been an ongoing 4-year debate on what's going to happen with it.
Oh, I see.
And we had a big committee called Save the Orchards. They wouldn't dig up any of the trees, but the council went against that idea and voted to allow the Historical Society, who sits next to us, to put some buildings into the orchard. So that's where it's at now. They haven't done anything, but that's what they're headed for. So we're afraid that, once they get the foot in the door, there's not any much land left, and to be honest with you, land in Sunnyvale runs around $5 million an acre, and it's quite a ways from $500. So this all happened in the last 75 years.
Right. Now, when you look around the valley, and obviously you've been here for all of the changes in the valley, what do you think about what's happened?
Like everybody in the room, I think they're tired of the traffic, and they're very concerned about the high prices of everything, and I don't see it coming back down, and we have caused a lot of our problems for ourselves. And I'm not saying it's wrong what they did, but it's a troublesome problem, with parking, with buses, with schools, with, all the homeless and all the different problems that it has caused. So, there is a positive side. It's helped a lot of people make money, and they've done some great things, and I'm amazed at what they have done. Apples and the Googles and Facebooks and et cetera, and Hewlett Packards and all that.
Oh, that's a story I want you to tell. Can you tell the story about how you met David Packard?
Well, that was by accident, kinda. But a fellow from Cupertino here, he's gone down the street, and you might have known him. His name was Pete Camarda. He had farmed Mr. Packard's apricot orchard, and he was phasing out. He was a lot older than I was. So he kind of asked me to help. So I went up there, and they have some nice fruit. Mr. Packard takes good care of it. So I took the job. I had it for about 5 or 6 years. And Mr. Packard was very kind to me. And he said that in all the years that he'd had the orchard, I was the only guy who ever paid him. So he thought that was cool, but he also said that he had his chauffeur drive him down to Sunnyvale when the orchard was still standing on El Camino.
Your orchard.
In my father's orchard, yeah. He said, look at this crazy fool, he's farming right here in the middle of town. That was pretty nice of him to say.
So one year you needed cots, and you called him up and offered him money for his cots. That's when he started laughing and saying,
well, yeah, but the funny part was I don't think he needed the money. Maybe that's the only I could offer him, there was not much else to say, but it was a wonderful romance. He was 100% for his orchard. In fact, he used to get off of work, and I guess a lot of stress in the business, and he had a tractor, and he would cultivate the ground, and that was his idea of relaxation. So he was quite a man, and I learned a lot. He was the Undersecretary of Defense under George W.H. Bush.
no, Nixon, under Nixon.
Okay.
I think under Nixon.
Well, he was also, when they had the war with next door to Iraq.
Oh, Kuwait?
Yeah, and he was in charge, and on his desk he had 3 telephones, a red one for the president, a white one for the head of England, which is the lady, I forget her name.
Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, and then of course the black one for me.
Now, I heard from Mike McKinney, who runs that orchard now, that Mr. Packard in his will said he wanted the acres up there. There's 60 acres of Packard Orchard in Los Altos Hills. And Mike said that Mr. Packard left it to be dry farmed only.
Right, he had rules, and when you put up a trust, he put up $25 million to guarantee that orchard stays there forever. And he made the rules of how he wanted to take care of it. You have to, by law, follow all these rules. In fact, his son lived next door. He had 7 acres. I had to take care of that a little bit. And they had to fence it off because you're not allowed to take a tractor or a truck from the Packard orchard any place else and use it because that violates the trust.
Oh, I see. So that's
It's a very technical thing, and I think he had to have about, for his whole trust or whole deal, about 60 or 70 people working on all this to make it happen. Because there was a lot of other things in it besides the orchard in his trust.
sure. I'm sure there was, yes. But that's just one of them. But Mike McKinney, the young man who operates the orchard now, said he wished he could water the apricots because he'd get bigger fruit.
Yeah. He had one idea. Well, I'll tell you one more story I thought was very interesting with the fact that when he was passing away, I had known most of the help, and one of the ladies that took care of him, I don't remember her name, Maria, I think, but she came to me one day out in the orchard and she said that Mr. Packard had passed away and that he woke up about 3 in the morning and told her to call 911. And he went in the bathroom and she called 911, she said, and she went back into the bathroom to help him. He had his hands on the sink and looked in the mirror, and he said, well, God, it's up to me and you now. I thought that was very apropos for the gentleman. He was a quiet guy.
I always knew Hewlett Packard was big, but I didn't know it was that big. Well, I think it would be a really good time to ask for questions from the audience. What do you think? Do you have questions for Charles?
Yeah, what was the price of land per acre when the Sunnyvale Heritage Orchard formed?
I think around $30,000 an acre, and that was in 1977.
Okay.
And I remember that as a number.
Did everybody hear that question? He was asking about the price of the orchard per acre. Question?
2 questions. One, how late did your mother work at the cherry stand?
How late? You mean late in her life?
In years.
Oh, years. How long did your mom work at the stand in her life?
Well, she started and she passed away in 1984, and she was still working at that time. She loved that fruit stand, and there's a lot of stories about that, but she loved that stand and she worked it until she was gone.
Then the reason I asked is I probably met your mother then, because I remember it from.
He said he probably met your mother then, because he remembers a little lady there.
652. I have one more question, Charlie. I remember this valley with the apricots, the prunes, and the walnuts, and cherries. I think cherries were maybe 4th in size, but what do you think was the proportion of these crops in the whole valley? Apricots, prunes, and walnuts.
Okay, the question was, what was the proportion of the fruit? The largest crop, the second largest, the third largest in this valley?
Well, the prunes were the biggest crop.
Yeah.
They grew all over. This area, by the way, had the best prunes in the valley. We bought prunes from this area, from farmers, and in a dry away, what they call, if you put it into a hydrated prune, it dried 1 to 1. Other areas of the valley, they dried 2 to 1. In some places where the soil was very poor, they dried 3 and 4 to 1.
And tell us what that means. What do you mean by dried 2 to 1?
Well, you pick a plum and you dry it, either in the sun or in a dryer, and it shrinks. But because it has so much sugar and so much fiber in it, it doesn't shrink, it just dries. And we had a lot of customers who come and buy those prunes. They always wanted Saratoga prunes because the meat was golden inside. It was beautiful.
So prunes were the largest, and then apricots were the second largest?
Apricots were, yeah, and the cherries were the smallest because cherries have to have a certain soil. And the best cherries in the valley were former river bottoms, and they had gravel. And the Stevens Creek, Mountain View, Sunnyvale area had a lot of that, and there was some of it on Lawrence Road, and there was some in San Jose, and some in East Foothill. But you have to remember that the Earth is 4 billion years old, and all these thousands and millions of years, the rains deposited the topsoil. And cherries, for instance, need a lot of water often, not a lot of water at once. And we had an orchard for years in Mountain View, and the cherries always produced, and they always were 10-row, if you would. They were all jumbo, and they were all sweet as sugar because they had that gravelly ground. It was impossible really to have a commercial orchard north of the 101, because that was pretty much adobe.
Oh, yeah. Now, you told me one time that the apricots from Los Altos were the sweetest. Were you just sweet-talking me, Charles? Or is that true?
Oh, sure. No, that's the truth. My dad taught me a lot, and he just knew a lot, and we had about 5 or 6 orchards, Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Cupertino, and Los Altos. And some we owned and some we rented. And when we used to dry them, in the dry yard, we had about 5 acres, and you could pick out where the fruit came from by the color of the fruit. And Los Altos fruit had the deepest orange, and they were the thickest cotton. Because of whatever the soil is up there, it was the best. But like everything else in the valley, it all is good.
Yeah.
It's very good.
Sure, question?
Go, no, in the front row.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to know if there's anything that we can all do to protect your orchard from being taken over by the museum.
All right, we have a question about how to protect the orchard. And actually, that's true in Los Altos and in Saratoga. You know, with land as valuable as it is, these little heritage orchards are always going to be under assault, aren't they?
Yes.
So she wanted to
The
know
answer
what
to your
to
question is that it's a political thing sometimes, and I don't say it's wrong, but I didn't like it. I mean, we had over 1,200 signatures that we gathered in less than 2 weeks. And we had 30 people speak in our favor at the council meeting. And yet the council voted 5-2 in favor of the Historical Society. So what can you do? Right now they're in a study. That's a funny question. A study what? I mean, but they're in a study. And then they have all these rules and regulations of what you have to do to build. So we're on a holding pattern right now. I don't know where it's going to end up. The council has the final say. And, unless we were talking, somebody said, why don't you make a referendum, and you have to have, it's too late now, you have to, within 30 days, you have to have 10% of your voters, registered voters signed up, and you have to verify that they're all registered voters, and then you have to have a referendum, put a date for a ballot, and
It's very complicated.
very tough and complicated and intense, and you need a lot of people. And the world is busy today. People are very busy.
One of the things I think is a good thing to do is not just write the city council, but maybe it's my career as a journalist, but I always think it's a good idea to write a letter to the editor. Because when it gets published, people who are in power read it. And if it makes them look silly, it's always can have some impact. So use the media. If you have a group, call the media, because we love a little red meat, we chase those stories. So here's a question.
I don't know if there's anybody here that worked on saving the orchard here at Saratoga, but I brought a story for you, Charlie, about the way we saved this orchard in perpetuity. We put together a huge group of people, and this is how we did it.
So I don't know if everyone can
Is
hear
there
that.
anybody here? who
But
went
there was,
Saratoga?
there was a time when the Saratoga orchard needed saving. And I think maybe that's a whole nother program. Where's Annette anyway? See Annette? Yeah, there she is. You know, at some point, I think that would be a good story to cover about, you know, the orchards and when they're under threat. But you have some information on that and
I
how
have
it
a
was
story
saved.
I wrote, it was in 2002.
Yeah, so it's been 17 years ago. But yeah, this is gonna be a problem when land is worth $5 million an acre and you've got 13 acres of trees. Not everybody appreciates that, so it's gonna be a challenge. What's in the back?
Did you manage, and how did you manage the diseases and pests of the orchard? Was there a county ag at the time, or UC Davis at the time?
Okay, the question is, and this is a good one for a valley full of people, how do you manage pest control?
Well, it's a tough job. One of the gentlemen here in the audience, Andy Mariani, he helped me a lot.
Annie, hold up your
And
hand.
we try to keep ahead of the pests, but there's always a new one, and we just have to spray a lot. Basically, that's what we do. We go from sometimes 1 to 2 to 3 or 4 sprays a season to defeat the pests, and we have to follow all the rules and all that sort of thing. We have people who work for the pest control companies who provide us with the spray. And we show them what we need and they accommodate us. And they've been doing very well with it. It's a tough game because these pests keep coming. So it's not easy and you have to follow all the rules to spray and you have to be within the regulations and it's a very touchy deal.
Yeah. Charlie, there was a really fun radio show that was broadcast from Sunnyvale State University. Do you remember that?
Did Charles do a radio program? Did you do a radio program, Charles? Sunnyvale State University.
Well, we were on board the people about that. But, well, in 1983, a group of us went to the Final Four basketball game in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
And I heard there's a lot about that trip that you can't report.
And we were standing at the top of the escalator, the second floor of the Albuquerque Civic Center. And there was 1,500 coaches in the audience. And I was standing next to a coach by the name of Carroll Williams, who was the head coach of Santa Clara University basketball team, because I had known him. And up the escalator came Jim Valvano, who was the coach of North Carolina State, who was playing in the final game for the championship against Houston, and it was quite a game. Anyway, they met and talked, and Mr. Valvano walked up to me and he stuck his hand out and he says, "Jim Valvano, North Carolina State." And I was standing there and I said, "Charlie Olson, Sunnyvale State." And that's how it got started. And then we had some clever people involved in all this, friends of mine, and we sat down one day and dissected it, and we decided to create a university, and we did. And what happened was that there was a nice lady in the back with a pink shirt back there named Carol Butler, who was a Sunnyvale city clerk. She had heard about it, so she sent the Mercury News over to see us. And then we had a big assist from Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh, the coach of the 49ers in Stanford. We had a team in the 60s in San Jose called the San Jose Apaches. Some of you might have remembered it. Bill Walsh was our head coach, and we were a very good team. And we were the professional team, and what the goals were, that if the NFL expanded, we would have dibs on the Santa Clara ballot. And that was our goal. We were going to cut a fat hog, as the saying goes. So anyway, what happened was is that the league was going on, and we had players from the Oakland Raiders taxi squad and the 49er taxi squad. So we had a good team, and we were undefeated north.
But now you've gotten away from Sunnyvale State.
Well, wait,
Okay, we're gonna look them up.
Anyway, you're right. I'll get two stories. Anyway, we went down to a league meeting in Orange County at a big convention center, and one of the fellas from another team, the Orange County Rhino, suggested that to solve all our problems, every owner should put in $250,000 and divide it amongst the teams that weren't doing so well. Well, when I heard that, and we didn't have $250,000. So I excused myself, and I remember Bill Walsh says, what are you gonna do? I said, I'm going home, and I don't wanna be here tomorrow when they ask me about the $250,000. So Bill says, that's a good point. He says, have you got any money? And I said, yeah. He said, how much money? I got $40. He says, give me 20. It's a true story. So I got on a plane, flew home. He stayed there, faced the music. Turned out that the Apaches played the Orange County Miners for the state championship of the Continental Football League, and we got nipped 40-0.
So you were almost an NFL owner.
Yeah, almost, yeah. So, Sunnyvale State got to be famous because Bill Walsh got to be famous. And Bill Walsh and the coach of Cincinnati, they had a Super Bowl game in Miami. And Bill Walsh asked us to give him some Sunnyvale State shirts and hats. So we did that, and he gave a set of the hat and the shirt to the coach of Cincinnati, which I can't remember his name right at the moment. A fine coach and a fine man.
And he wore the shirt.
And they wore them when they arrived in the planes from their hometowns. And the Associated Press called me up and wanted to know the story about Sunnyvale State. So
now you know how Sunnyvale State was founded.
yeah, and then of course, this is another good story. We had two famous guys, Bill Walsh and Eddie DiBartolo, was part of the original Sunnyvale State. And so when the newspaper guys came to my father's office, they asked me about if this was all true. So I said yes, and we also had on our board of directors Peter Uberoff, who at the time was the president of the Major League Baseball. So I had his phone number, and I had Eddie DiBartolo's phone number, and we called them from my father's office, and they received both calls. And the sports writer said, we could have called all day to these guys, they never really called us back. But it was really fun because Peter Uberoff, who went to Fremont High School, by the way, graduated in 1960, he was the commissioner of baseball. He had had a meeting in St. Louis, and so they transferred the call from New York City to the meeting in St. Louis, and he took the call and verified Sunnyvale State. So that's truth in the television, you might say.
Well, if Peter Uberoff believes it, I believe it. You know, one thing we forgot to mention is that there's a Charles J. Olson Way in Sunnyvale. You have now, is this a real road or is it like Sunnyvale State?
It's called Olson Way. It was named after the family. And Julia Miller, who was a former councilman, spearheaded it and got it through. And so our street is about 300 yards long. And when I heard about it, I said, why don't they name it El Camino Real? That's as far as it got. But if you go out on the street and it's our name's on it. And so if you go fast, drive by it, you'll see it maybe.
More questions. Do we have more questions from the audience?
Two questions. You have a big legacy represented here and that you can talk about. How are you feeling about your legacy and what do you want to do going forward? Are you going to give more interviews?
So your legacy, in a way, it's a little early to think about that because you're still getting up at 5 every morning working, aren't you? Do you think about your legacy as a grower here in the valley, or what you'd like your legacy to be?
Well, that's a tough question because I never think about it. And I don't like to, act like it's a big deal because many people who farm, they farm because they want to. And so it's something you like to do, and I don't think about it as a legacy if there's such a thing, because I know that you go to some of these parks or some of these squares around the world, and you see a statue of somebody that was 1800, and the first question is, who is he? And the birds sit on top of the statue, so the legacy business is a tough one, but I like what I'm doing, and I think everybody's in the farming business, and when it's successful and people appreciate what you do, that's gratitude in itself. It really is. A lot of folks have done very well in real estate and whatever, and you never see them, you might say, but it's the way they're living too, so everybody has their own niche.
We're up with Lisa Newman.
Thank you.
And we have a guest here who is the author of For the Love of Apricots. Lisa, your question.
Thank you, Robin. Inspired in no small part by your book on California apricots. But also inspired, and this is my kind of question request, is for you to say a few words about your sister's book, because it really meant a lot to me growing up here in the valley, Passing Farms and During Valley.
Yes, I have a copy of it.
Thank you.
My
sister, Yvonne Jacobson, she wrote a book somewhere in the 70s and 80s.
Passing Farms, Enduring Values. It was in the 80s.
And it's a well-written book, and she chronicled, I think there's 6,000 farm families in the valley.
I'm sure it's available. I didn't look it up in the catalog, but I believe it's here in the library, and it's in the library system. And it's Yvonne Olson Jacobson's book. And because she's from the Olson family, she has a terrific and interesting perspective on this.
What's her name again?
Yvonne Olson Jacobson. And the book is called Passing Farms, Enduring Values. She has a lot of family photographs from your farm.
She took a lot of photographs from a lot of farmers, and I learned a lot about from that book how so many farmers are the same. I mean, we do the same things, different days, same things. It's phenomenal.
The book is interesting because one of the editors was Wallace Stegner. She did the book for the California History Center, and he also wrote the introduction. So it's really a spectacular book. I wanted to mention one other book. When I first did a talk about my apricot book at this library, the librarian suggested that I read and get a copy of this book, which is called Field Guide to California Agriculture. And it's the size of one of those field guide for bird books. And it's designed to put in your glove box. And it's really amazing how large California agriculture is. Those of us who grew up in this valley saw the trees around us all the time, and we loved the fruit and the smell and the fun, and we didn't really consider, most of us who weren't in the business, that it was a huge, big business. And this book kind of helps you understand the cross between the joy of it and the work of it and the economy of it. And it's done by color coding, the book is. So if you see something that's green out your window and you're driving on 101, you can start looking up what that might be, broccoli or artichokes. Because we are still, in spite of the loss we've seen in this valley, we're still the largest agricultural state in the Union. And agriculture is still up there among the highest products we produce, in spite of the fact that in Silicon Valley we begin to believe that only tech runs our state. So it's important to see that, and that I highly recommend that. I really enjoy having that question.
The California Farmland Trust is an organization trying to preserve at least some of our agricultural heritage. the California Farmland Trust.
California Farmland Trust, and the way I understand that is done is that the production rights are purchased out on the land.
Yes.
And that's a way that some farmland is being produced. One more question.
Charlie, I was wondering if you could tell us a story about the barn and some of the old tractors that you have on some very old tractors and Jeeps and stuff you use.
This is your collection you have there in the middle of the orchard, of all that stuff you have there. Yeah.
Well, we're very fortunate, a lady by the name of Claire Bianchi, who had two wonderful brothers who were farmers. She wanted to make a legacy for them, so she asked the city if they could put the barn on the orchard property. And it was done in 2003, and she put up $400,000 to have her family barn taken down, and took it down in 11 days, and then they put it back up in the orchard in Sunnyvale in 9 days. So she has the property still there. She lives in the house. The light rail comes within 10 feet of her bedroom, and she got a hefty chunk of dough from the, which is rightfully so, from the San Jose Transit Authority, and that's where the money came from to transfer that barn. So we enjoy it very much. It's the original wood. It's the same as it was when it was over there.
But you have a lot of other stuff. You showed me a cot washer the other day that
Well,
goes back
we
to
have a
your
lot of
father.
The original equipment that my dad used, and I was showing her one of the parts of the machine. It's about 30 feet long, and the machine cost $350 in 1935. And I had to replace a bearing about 5 years ago, a bearing. And the bearing cost $350. It's a true story.
Where's the old Jeep come from that you have?
My dad bought that from the surplus of the Army in 1950 for $500, came in a big box. We used it to drag the sprinkler pipe around the orchards.
Now, just so that you'll know, Charles does not live in the past. Why don't you tell them where you're going in January on your vacation?
Or go skiing. In the winter time, I love it. It's a great sport. Take my daughter and all the family, and we all go to Sun Valley, Idaho, and ski. It's a wonderful sport and a lot of fun.
How do you stay so fit, Charles? How do you stay so fit? You're very physically
Just work,
fit.
just go to work on the farm, you find out. You find out, the harder you work, the luckier you get. That's the way it works.
We have one more question. I think this will be the last one. One more?
I'm trying to formulate this question, but is there a year that you guys can think of as sort of peak agricultural production in the valley?
Oh, he was asking what was the peak agricultural year in the valley. Do you have any idea?
I would say it's right during the Second World War. Before the Second World War, I believe would be the peak. There was 8 or 9 million fruit trees in the valley, and they produced 175 million cans of fruit in those years. And after the war, during the war saved the farmers a lot because there was nobody buying the fruit, and the war effort took it. And after the war, it was a steady increase until the boom, the dot-com boom, or whatever you call it, started. But that was the years in the 40s.
And that was partly because during World War II, what was called the War Department, now called the Pentagon, the War Department bought up all of the fruit contracts. We had 16 million men and women in uniform, and they had to eat 3 times a day. And the Defense Department, the War Department, bought up all the contracts for fruit in this valley, and that propped up the prices for all the growers. And then at the end of the year, if they had surplus, they would release that to the stores, to the grocery stores, the government would. And that was part of rationing. Then you had ration coupons you could use to go buy fruit. But meanwhile, the first of the fruit went to all of our soldiers and our allies in uniform all around the world. And then at the end of the war, when the contracts were no longer purchased by the government, the price dropped because now there wasn't an automatic huge market for the fruit. So at that same time, then there was a huge pressure because the soldiers came home and married, and there was a pressure in California for land for homes. So if you're not making a lot of money from your crop, and somebody wants to buy your acreage for houses, then that's when that started to happen. My research shows that it was around 1972 that that tech crossed fruit for the economy of our valley. And fruit didn't stop being grown in 72, but that was the year that tech made more in the economy. So. All right, so I think we should all thank you. You want to say a final word?
I want to say one thing.
Okay, one more thing.
I got to tell you one quick story. It's a true story. This lady was being interviewed on the television, and she was 100 years old. And she told the story. She said she was going down the street where she lived, and a big wind came and blew her dress up over her head. And she grabbed her hat. And a fellow stopped and said, why are you doing that? You're showing your private parts. And she said, honey, my private parts are 100 years old. I just bought this hat.